Well, probably.
It just blew all in.
That was.
Yeah, I actually just.
Where that's, that's what surprises me.
Well, I always
Maybe
look.
trailer amount.
I always looked at lunch.
Trailer.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
I ran the section, I was like,
But it probably will rank.
I
some
see
of
some
them.
I don't really invest in. I don't have.
Yeah.
There'll be some other way to.
Insurance coverage, maybe, but
Yeah.
still, with my boat, I'd try to get it out of
The
there
other one.
somehow.
I'm not gonna.
A lot of people want to leave. Right.
That's true.
Change the color.
For weather.
I don't like style, and I'm like, no, it's cheaper.
Oh,
It's the same color.
percentage?
And I like the color.
I don't know. You know, it's time to-
You ready?
Call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Flower socks.
Here.
Vogel.
Here.
Triplet. Here. Old Fest.
Here?
Pregnants. Here. Sires.
Here.
Approval of agenda. I would take a motion to the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Passes. Move on to item number 5, Jester Park Business Group.
Minutes.
Oh, shoot, I missed the minutes. Need 4 before 5. Approval of Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes from May 15th, 2023. Motion?
Make a motion to approve?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, now we'll move on to number 5. Thank you, Jenny. Here we go.
I'm first, right? All right. I'm Laura Jondal. I'm with P&Z Design Services, and we are representing the Jester Park Business Group here. We have our site plan put together, which I think is the same one that's in the packet you guys received. There haven't been any changes since Friday or something when that came out. We've kind of scaled back our plans on this one. We have been working with Snyder and have found there are some buffers and setbacks and things that we comply with that weren't necessarily something that we were aware of initially, so we've been working through that. I think the biggest thing here is our our landscaping plan. We're trying to bring this site in compliance. Understanding is there has been some action taken, so our client is just trying to get his site up into compliance with a 25-foot buffer along the north here, adding some paving areas kind of where the gravel currently exists out there, and just kind of to the end of the building, at the edge of the building there's kind of gravel area, little grass area, so they're going to pave that so that there's marked parking stalls and like that. Then there is some discussion about what's going on back here. Many years, like 10 years ago, there was a setback that was reduced along this rear setback line. And it was our client's understanding that that also took care of the buffer along that property line, since that's typical. But in further discussion with Snyder, it sounds like that the buffer was to remain intact. So there's been a little bit of question on that, but we're working with them to get that figured out and taken care of and things like that. So we've scaled this down from our previous plans, would have a couple building additions, things like that, some additional. Right now, we're just trying to get it into compliance to meet the legal issues that are going on with this project. Have any questions for me, or should I just talk? Travis?
So, since the memo would have been issued to you guys, P&Z Design Group has addressed all but comments 6 and 7, which are just the legal documents related to the buffers, easements, which can be taken care of after you guys act on it prior to it going to council. It's one of those things where we don't typically require them to have signed legal documents for P&Z. In case something changes, you guys want to make a recommendation that you want to see changed. We don't want to have to collect signatures multiple times. Aside from that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the history of the site or anything like that.
Can you explain the waiver that they're requesting?
So the waiver that they are requesting is for the west property line. Back in 2013, the Board of Adjustment waived the requirement for the building setback to 0 feet based on the minutes that are available and Kathleen's recollection, because she was in attendance at that meeting, it was not specifically acted on that the buffer itself would be waived, but just the building setback. Their request, I think there is a way that you could interpret the building setback being waived as both, simply because if building setback were to sit closer than 50 feet to the property line, you couldn't have a 50-foot buffer easement, because the buffer cannot have anything in it. It is 4 plantings and that's it. So that's the waiver that they're requesting, is to basically remove the buffer easement on the west property line, to be in line what the property owner had understood the building setback waiver to be.
Just a follow-up to that, their letter says western and southern buffer.
So the southern buffer has been waived already because of the approved site plan that's in place. That building sits substantially closer to the property line than the setback, as well as much closer to the property line than you can get a buffer in.
Okay.
There's not,
So
there's,
that one's not an issue.
yeah, but it's strictly the west buffer.
And the reason for the west is because of, is it back there and it backs up to buffer
Correct.
the way
Yeah, and the reason there is a requirement is because this property, so it's within the TCI planned unit development, but the way that that PUD was put together was each individual lot was assigned zoning within the PUD, and then they explicitly told you what exceptions they were doing to each lot. So that PUD has always been governed as if it was zoned all those different districts, except where specifically changed in PUD ordinance. So your M1 zoning, no matter what it's adjacent to, unless it's M districts, requires a type C buffer.
So the tree shown here would be actually inside the current tree line. Am I reading that right?
So the tree line is right,
Correct.
and this
Yeah.
is that floodplain area, and I think there's like feet of trees here,
Right.
and then this is on here.
Yeah, and then the proposed trees in the hatch area would be counted towards open space.
But there's some type of legal action being taken right now, is that how we read this?
Yes, so on the original site plan or the previously approved site, it's not actually, the previously approved site plan, there were native trees, heavy timber, noted as existing trees to remain in place, I think is the wording. And the property owner has removed a great deal of them. And so the city has filed a municipal infraction due to illegally trees.
And so if we offer this waiver, what's the impact of that on this legal?
So the legal action is currently stayed pending action from the council.
Yeah, so if they have a approved site plan that goes through the council, then they'll be in compliance with their site plan. So we would not pursue that legal action any further.
If we do not grant it, then they would have to go back in and plant trees or somehow bring it up to.
They would then be required, if you do not grant the waiver, they would then have to put in a type C buffer for the zone.
And this isn't the type C buffer, obviously, that is showing here with the trees.
Correct. That is just open space plantings. The type C buffer is opaque to 5 feet with intermittent vertical obstruction to 20 feet. It is intended to be a full-on screen.
So this would be done either way. If we waive the buffer, those trees would still go in.
Correct.
How's the city feel about this?
I think we're, made a recommendation to you, could grant the, buffer relaxation. And, I mean, I think we're fine with that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is something you've worked with
Yes.
the owner to bring it to us. It isn't something that the owner has said, I'm gonna do it anyway because I have the right to do it.
Correct.
To bring it forward. It isn't something, because there's legal action doesn't mean that there's a problem with granting waiver.
No, I think we're fine with this. This was a compromise we came up with for a recommendation. I do believe the property owner intends to bring another site plan in the next few months. Is that correct, with some additional buildings?
I don't know for sure.
The site plan before you tonight is really to correct the issue at hand, which was the removal of buffer trees between zoning classifications. So this would correct the issue. Then I think it's the business owner's intent to come back in the next few months with additional site plan.
So I have a little bit of some issues. So they've been out of compliant for 10 years with the buffer on the
No.
north next to the,
So north was specifically granted a reduced building setback, and then, the Board of Adjustment granted a 25-foot type B buffer that would then supplement the type B buffer that also existed on the Wolf Creek Town plat, I don't know which plat, plat 6 maybe, side of things. And so they agreed to reduce that, knowing that there is a required buffer on the other side as well. That basically it more or less forms it's more than a semi-opaque, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a type C buffer, but it screens those. And then the other piece of it too is on the previous site plan, there was a future building shown that ran east-west along the north property line. And it specifically noted that there could not be windows on the north side of that building. And the Board of Adjustment viewed that as a means to buffer the activity of that building with a solid screen of a face or a windowless, doorless building. So the north buffer, that variance has been, or I think that actually is a variance, has been granted by the Board of Adjustment.
but it expired 5 years ago?
No, so what the issue was is back in December, the property owner went in and tore out additional trees, really, yeah, about half of that hatch was heavily wooded timber that had been there a long, long time. I can't even put a time frame on it for you, but.
And that is because the property owner's understanding was when the Board of Adjustments waived the setback, that waived the buffer. Okay.
So where's the property owner?
My understanding is historically he has chosen not to be at meetings because it goes better. That is my understanding.
I would suggest to the Planning and Zoning Commission that you review and make a recommendation this evening. That when you get another site plan submitted in a few months, I do believe that the property owner needs to be held to the city standards, because as you see, there's a history here of variance requests that have been granted. So that is my suggestion to you this evening, is we're fine with the recommendation that's in front of you tonight, but if this does come back before you in the next few months, I think we need to just take that into consideration.
Was this builder, this owner, was he back in 1990? Was he involved?
No,
with it?
he's not owned it that long. I'm not sure what the history is. Actually, you have a note in here of what the property used to be. Ellsbury Company's Bed Shed
Mhm.
Yes.
is what it was originally.
The current property owner acquired it from the owner of the shed and then converted it to, Kathleen's recollection was that he was doing either pool maintenance or lawn care out of it originally. And then in 2013, he expanded to offer rental space and other types of services out of that facility.
And that all meet our, and
Are there any other properties that, if we offer a variance here, that would be impacted or that could come and ask for special treatment because of this?
So under this particular circumstance, I don't believe so, because I think the only reason that we allowed it to make this far is that there is a heavily wooded floodplain area that is completely non-developable. And you don't have many of those spaces left in the city that aren't built right to. So that's kind of why we don't have a ton of heartburn about this variant or this waiver. Is this is a very unique circumstance in that it backs up directly to Wolf Creek, and it doesn't have any sort of building,
And
because-
there's no way for a building to go back there.
unless the
like
golf
some
course.
golf course,
Yeah.
that's a whole different
Well, the
conversation.
floodplain area wouldn't be, but
Right, but there's no way that a building would be back behind there at any point unless the golf course is
yeah.
completely rebuilt.
So then you have that issue, and then they're completely off the hook and they don't have to do anything. What's the impact of them removing all these trees and whatnot on the floodplain? What's the erosion process there? There's not, we don't think so? We
no,
don't
because
know?
it's outside of the floodplain, so it's at least per FEMA standards.
So them tearing up, taking trees down, disturbing the soil has no impact on any type of erosion, any type of.
I don't know that we've studied that or looked into it to give you an actual good answer.
But any expansion to the property would require a stormwater management plan in compliance with your current, or well, at that point, current code. So even if it did make an impact to it, they would have to account for that prior to expanding. Because essentially, so the additional pavement, that was something that was deferred as part of the 2013 approval. And then the trees were to remain on the site plan, or per the approved site. So those are the two things that they're, so one of them we knew was coming, and then the other one is to address a non-compliance that was created.
So what came down in 2013, was it explicit that those trees were supposed to stay?
So there was a note on the site plan that was noted as existing trees to remain in place.
So
Or
regardless
something
of what the buffer is, that was still a stipulation.
And it was understood that some of those would likely come down in the future because he had shown, the property owner had shown future buildings, some of which encroached into that area. But that was not explicitly approved by council or P&Z.
So the only other thing on that whole site plan, it specifically showed on the north, the 25-foot buffer to be there. And so that's where the difference came. There wasn't specifically a line that said 50-foot buffer. It did say trees to remain, but it didn't have the buffer line indicated like it did this side up here. So that's, I assume, his interpretation, since there wasn't a specific line like the other side that said buffer. But it did call out trees to remain on a portion of it.
Are there still trees there, or do you take them all out?
My understanding is they're outside of our property line.
It's cleared back to the property. Where it's crosshatched there, take all those trees out.
Yes, in this area here.
It wasn't all trees, was it? Was it?
No, not all the way, no.
And that's where buildings are gonna, and that's why you wanted the zero setback.
In the plan we had been working on previously, this area became a detention basin up here, and there were buildings here. I believe a building addition here, but this is where the question then came up because this building was within that 0 foot setback, and that's what kind of triggered everything back here. So no, the buildings weren't going to be back here. This was going to become our detention basin. If you've seen the site, it's kind of up and down in this area. There's a low spot here. There's kind of a low spot here. This right now is high back in this area, so drainage is kind of all over the place. It kind of leaves and things to get out. It's quite flat up here next to this residential area up here.
So if we don't grant the waiver, or recommend to not grant the waiver, he can still build his buildings like he wants to. And because there aren't any trees there, you can still use that as a detention area, is that correct?
Well, the
It's just-
site plan will have to come back through the city and get approval at that time that he decides.
That doesn't
what he's
answer
gonna-
my question.
Okay.
Okay, you want me to rephrase it again, please? Is that all right? He's, well, I guess what I'm getting at is I'd like to see a site plan before we grant the waiver, or at least a preliminary site plan. And it sounds like, even if we don't grant the waiver, the city doesn't grant us, he can still build his buildings where he wants to. And because the trees are gone, you can still do your retention ponds in the hatched area. Is that correct?
So, Doug, your code requires a 50-foot type C buffer. If you do not grant the waiver, they would be required to put a 50-foot
All
buffer.
right.
along
They
the
have to put
western-
it back in on the
Correct.
west.
Correct.
Okay,
To your current type C standards.
okay.
Unless they put a building back there?
No, that's for the north side has that reduced buffer, and then they could put a windowless, doorless
Okay,
building
just the
along the
north
north
side.
property. But the way that the buffer easement would be set up and the way that your code requires it, nothing be constructed in that 50-foot buffer.
So it's written on here though, the rear yard setback.
That would be the rear, technically.
The north is the rear?
No, the west is the rear, north would be a side.
It's opposite your.
So that's what I'm saying, they could put a building way back.
No, because that's where they're asking for the waiver.
That's what's confusing though. When you look at your Board of Adjustment to allow a 0-foot rear yard setback.
So the building setback would be 0.
That's what I'm saying. If you
But-
put buildings across the whole back, then,
So that's the squeeze.
yeah.
Is the building setback is 0, but there's still a 50-foot buffer required. And you can't put a building in a 50-foot buffer. And so that's where the waiver request comes from.
So my interpretation from the conversations that we've had is that the owner assumed if the Board of Adjustments gave him a 0 setback, the buffer was then removed. But there's nothing in the minutes, I didn't work here then, so there's
Yeah,
nothing in the
no, it's-
minutes that indicate as such, so it just wouldn't have made sense for the Board of Adjustments to give a 0 setback and still require the buffer, because what's the point?
You're assuming that was meant to be on the north. Is that what you're saying?
No, so the north, they explicitly requested a reduced setback, and they explicitly requested a type B buffer.
They changed the buffer.
Yeah, they changed, because it should have been a type C 50-foot buffer as well. They explicitly reduced both.
So by doing this, do we get rid of the whole 0-foot setback? Is that tossed out?
No, so the 0-foot setback would still apply, and then you would be waiving the buffer required on the western property line. Essentially, in the developer's mind, bringing the two together in what he assumed or understood the 0-foot building setback to be.
And the issue from the city perspective is we can't make that assumption because it's not written down anywhere. Maybe the Board of Adjustments wanted to change it to a different type of buffer. Maybe the Board of Adjustments intended, we don't know. So that's why we're here, because now we need to make a decision on what it needs to look like so that it's either brought into compliance by them doing something, or it's actually in compliance as the way it sits.
So is the Board of Adjustment, I just wanna make sure, the Board of Adjustments was the group that also required that the trees stay in place.
That was through the site plan, I thought.
Yes. So the Board of Adjustment is for, it's used to get a variance from code, specifically zoning code. Right?
Correct.
And so there are certain things that the Board of Adjustment has to act on. Your city code allows for council and then by transitive property, you guys to make a recommendation on waiving buffers. That's one of the few sections that you can actually waive without going to adjustment. And so the Board of Adjustment, I just totally lost my train of thought. What was your question?
No, you're right. So the Board of Adjustments did the waiver part, or the variance part, but then P&Z and council did the site plan part.
And that's where the trees were supposed to remain in place.
Correct,
Okay.
because your site plan is the enforceable document.
I just want to make, I guess what my confusion was if they put a zero setback, but then if that was the group that said that the trees stay, did they assume that by the trees staying, there was an inherent buffer? That's what I was,
Got it.
I guess, trying to figure out.
Yeah, they weren't involved in the tree conversation.
Gotcha.
So to the Board of Adjustment, it didn't matter if they did a zero setback. I mean, if they were still intended to have a 50 buffer. But again, it doesn't make sense of why they would do that.
They would just not waive it.
So
Or they
that's,
changed the
that-
buffer.
yeah.
Or they change the buffer type, or they do something different.
and that's why you're tasked with this, so that everybody's on the same page moving forward.
Because ultimately, council will have to make the decision.
The Board of Adjustment has no business doing zero setback, period. I know they have that authority to do so, but it isn't right.
They can
They should not
overrule
be
us
doing
both.
that. What's that?
They can overrule us both,
Oh, yeah. But it's something that,
specific to a
it's
site.
something that they're not thinking correctly.
And I do think this was a unique lot with the massive amount of space that's unbuildable behind them. I think that was again, just in my conversations with the Board of Adjustments are usually pretty thorough. My assumption would be they were like, there's no other property like this in town. It's not gonna create a precedence. It's not gonna, we've done fences and all kinds of other things, but I mean, how much space is back there that's wooded floodplain?
So
I don't even know. It's a lot of space between this lot and technically the golf course lot.
I mean, and to be perfectly honest with you, until we started looking at this site, I didn't realize this lot abutted the golf course. I've driven by that lot so many times.
Just from the street, you can't tell.
Yeah, and I legitimately did not realize it abutted the golf course. So,
I can tell you from the golf course perspective though, especially during the fall, you can now see straight through and
Okay.
see that, and it's a drastic change.
Now, I think that's the farther south lot. I don't think it's this lot. I think you're talking about the lot that's south of the golf course's maintenance building. Because
It's not south of there, no. If you
Oh.
walk through and you go, the maintenance building's here, and you're walking along the back maintenance,
Yep.
you can see
Okay.
where you couldn't before. So that would be your true assuming.
It happened this winter though, so
The north property line, those are all homes behind it.
townhomes, that's your Wolf
Okay.
Creek townhomes.
So if we grant the waiver, they can put more density of buildings on this site, is that correct?
that would have to be approved at a different site plan.
Yeah, they can't just add buildings.
This would
They
only,
have to come back.
But they
with
could add more
additional-
because they wouldn't have to comply with that, or they would have another 50 feet over there that
This
they couldn't
way.
build on. Even though they have a zero setback, they
this
still
way though.
couldn't build on because
Right.
in effect, there's a 50-foot.
Oh, yes,
buffer
yes,
there.
correct.
So in effect, if that goes away, it's a higher density next to a residential.
Yes,
Correct.
but they again have to come back with another site plan, with updated site plan.
Because what you're acting on today is the existing buildings, a little bit of additional pavement, and then bringing that type B buffer to completion and planting the open space and parking trees. So you're not approving anything building-wise that isn't out there today.
The highlighted area or the line around, that is the correction of the type B buffer, correct?
Because some of those plantings were deferred to, I think it was 2018. At the time.
And just to be clear, if a building were added, then the 50-foot buffer could be added as well by us or by code
You could add a buffer
on the west,
or type buffer.
whatever, at that time. We don't eliminate that if we approve variance, right, at this point.
So if you approve a waiver, you're correct.
We're approving it for this for now.
Correct.
Right.
However, I don't know if it's good practice to waive it now and then come back and require it unless there's an extenuating circumstance where that building gets substantially taller than the existing ones. It has a bunch of windows, it has a bunch of doors, it has a bunch of lights, anything like that. I don't know that it would be good practice to do it that way.
But can't we tackle this issue once we see a preliminary site plan?
The problem is that they're not in compliance with their site plan right now, and we've taken legal action against them, so they need an updated
With the
site
existing
plan.
site plan.
Yes, and our code says that they only have 30 days. So this incident happened in December, and we've been working with the developer to come up with a solution. So already they're in violation of the city code. So I think it's important that they have an approved site plan and that they're in compliance with it.
Or you continue on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think their intent was to add some things to the site plan, but it could have taken several more months or well beyond that 30-day requirement period.
So it kind of sounds like in summary that the developer didn't really do this intentionally or maliciously, take these trees out. They just misunderstood or didn't understand the full extent of the buffer. Is
No.
it still there or is it not?
I think he knew the requirements.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I'm having a hard time. I mean, it's backing up to where it is. I don't have an issue necessarily with requiring buffer, but it was explicit that these trees need to stay, and he still went against that. That does not show me good faith in trying to honor the agreed upon plans.
And with the additional request on variance upon variance, I mean, it's a history that is troubling.
I guess. Yeah, and it sounds like there was miscommunication throughout, and we do have an owner that apparently wants to expand his business as well. I don't know, I can't judge if it was malicious or not. I would, with the amount of trees behind it, I wouldn't have a problem granting it myself. Might get outdoors.
Granting well, here's my problem. It's the zero setback. We should never do that. So at this point, if we grant this and standing that Board of Adjustment hasn't done, which is the developer could come back with buildings right on that property line, because it's zero. If the Planning and Zoning says no, we don't recommend that way. But they still go ahead and take it to City Council, and the City Council says no. What's binding? Because Board of Adjustment can overrule City Council. So there isn't anything we can do about the zero setback, as I understand it, unless we don't grant this waiver.
Board of Adjustment, yes, they could give an additional variance. I don't know that they would do that against a recommendation though from Planning and Zoning.
Board of Adjustment or City Council.
Board of Adjustment.
I'm saying that we could make a recommendation that it's not a zero setback, but that's just a recommendation, and the developer could go to City Council, and City Council agrees with us.
Sure.
and says no, but I'm saying Board of Adjustment still has already made a variance of that, which allows them to do that. Whether we'd approve the site plan or the city council approve that site plan, they could still proceed and do that anyway.
Sure.
Unless we don't grant the waiver, then there's still a buffer there and they can't do it.
You're correct on the site setback part, but there is a option, I suppose, that you could not grant a complete waiver of the 50-foot buffer and require whatever you feel the setback should be and adjust the buffer size. I mean, if the buffer's type can be changed, instead of a 50-foot buffer, what if you did I don't know what the code says,
So-
but
Yeah, so if we're talking about a type C buffer, a type C screen shall be located within a buffer easement of sufficient width to accommodate the required opaque screen as shown on an approved site plan, but in no case shall it be less than 50 feet wide unless specifically waived by council on an approved site plan. So by extension, you could recommend a specific waiver to
whatever size.
whatever size buffer you want.
And you could could they change the type? Like, could it be a B type instead of a C type, like the north? I'm not giving you a recommendation, I'm just talking it through.
Well, I think you have a good idea.
If we narrow it up,
Great.
we'll leave it a type C, you may not be able to achieve it, right? Is that?
I think it's gonna be really hard to maintain a normal type C buffer, because part of the way that you get a type C buffer is you get shrubs on either side of the trees, and then they can share in the sun.
What was the setback before it was reduced to zero?
It would have, well, so the code has undergone changes since,
Well, what is it now?
I think it was,
Yeah, what is it now?
setback.
it was 40 feet then,
Yes.
based on the notes.
The M1 district is 40 feet for a rear yard setback, which is what would apply to the western boundary.
So where is that on that map in comparison to where the current buildings are? Is that the shaded area like this, is that 25?
buildings.
Yes, and is the buffer that is taken out, how long is that, or how wide is that?
25. About 25 is right there. So another 25, is that what you want?
Well,
There-ish, give or take.
So that
I didn't see, I can't see where you drew the line. Can you do that? Yeah, thank you.
25.
That's where,
So the
Another
true line is the
25.
25.
Don't hold her to the exact
No, no,
measurement.
You're about,
Pick one of those 20 skits.
you're about to the edge of that existing building?
so,
Yes.
That was impressive.
I know.
so if we recommend to maintain a 20,
So that would then be approximately this one.
And get into the type.
Well, I was gonna say, but then that sounds like it would not work with the type of buffer.
Can we
required.
change the type, do you think? Cause does the type matter back here as much as?
I mean, I would think if the P&Z has the authority to waive a buffer, you could adjust.
We've done that on other site plans
Correct.
too.
Feels like, it, yeah.
Yeah.
So can we do a 20-foot type something?
So yeah, a type, well,
So the type B is what's up top.
That's a 25.
let me read you the description. So type B is opaque from the ground to a height of 3 feet with intermittent visual obstruction from above the opaque portion to a height of 20 feet. For comparison, a type C buffer is opaque to 6 feet with intermittent visual obstruction to 20 feet. So you're basically cutting those shrubs in half, height-wise. A type A is composed of intermittent visual obstructions from the ground to a height of at least 20 feet. So you're essentially
So we could say,
do trees 20
yeah.
foot on center, is more or less what
which is
type
kind
A
of what you're planning on anyway, with your
Right.
trees there.
Yeah.
We're
What,
just saying,
how many do you
However-
have there?
however.
If you do a type A buffer, every tree in that buffer is in addition to what they've already shown. Because open space and parking trees cannot be double counted against buffer trees.
Okay.
Say that again, please.
So the open space trees that they're showing now, they would have to,
So you'd have to add.
yeah, you'd have to add 20 foot on center trees because parking and open space trees cannot be counted towards buffer and buffer trees cannot be counted towards open space.
That's a type B, you're saying?
That was
That's
type A.
any buffers.
Any buffer.
Yeah.
Any buffers, you can't double count trees and shrubs included in a buffer with your open space and parking regulations. So you would essentially, if you were to add or make a recommendation to waive the type C 50 foot and make it a type A 20 foot, you would be asking them to add 20 foot on center trees along the western property.
And we are the city of trees? Just asking. Sorry. I don't know, I'm thinking if, you know, the fact that he willfully chose not to comply with the ordinances and always asked for forgiveness and not permission is unsettling, and so I'm okay with more trees, but
You're okay with an A?
with an A, yeah, and a 20 foot or 25 foot.
Well, it achieves the zero setback.
And if we take no action, does this go to the council anyway?
Well, they can take it, but we don't want to do, you know.
I was just asking.
I know, yes, it does. They can take it, they have the right. to
Technically,
take
the developer can ask that it goes to the council anyway. I don't know exactly what's in it, but there's a process.
Even if they say, if it's voted down, I think.
Yeah,
it's
if
a
you, even if
process.
you,
Yeah,
it would just be noted in the agenda proceedings of council that you made it, whatever recommendation you did, whether it was negative, positive, something in the middle, no action, just be noted that way.
Talking 6 or 8 trees probably added in type A, along that,
You know,
roughly. They look like they're about 20 foot apart now, roughly.
They didn't match to.
Like 480, 450? 450.
so then you're probably talking 23 trees.
In a type A,
In a
what would
type
it be
A.
in type B?
It would be the same amount of trees, but a type B would include shrubs.
Okay.
Up to a height of 3 feet.
So, if I was put on the spot as a recommendation, just on the fly, since this was kind of my spitball idea, I might recommend that you just do what is already set for the north part of the property, and it makes it simple. So the north part of the property has a 25-foot buffer with type B. So if you said, we're not willing to waive this whole thing, we're willing to change it, then it would make the site well, easier to enforce for me, I guess I'm selfishly saying, because it's all the same. But you can do whatever you want. That
You're
was
saying 25 foot around the,
yeah, so right now you have 25 foot up at the top with a B buffer. So if you're thinking 20 and an A on the rear, that's up to you, but you could just say, hey, this is why we came up with this idea. We're gonna give you 25 and B on the west side too.
And they still have to add 20 some
It'd
trees.
still be the same amount of trees regardless of
There'd
the
be
type.
additional shrubs and bulk type.
Actually, like.
Just a thought.
Just where it's easier.
I think from a site management perspective, that makes more sense.
are you guys good with that?
Yeah, I
Everything
think
you've
that
gone
they-
through to this point?
Yes.
We have a liaison, comes to these meetings for a purpose. Do you mind if we would ask you for what your thoughts might?
Yeah, is that okay?
Sure.
So I usually try to keep my
You can do
opinions
anything
to
you
my-
want.
Well, no, I can't, because, Board of Adjustment could just overrule me talking about that, no. But I'll answer your question. Typically, I try to remain quiet, because it's not my meeting, it's your meeting, and separation of recommendation versus formalization, whatever we do. Well, first I would say, good conversation, because it is a messy issue. And I hear more about, I'm gonna get the directions wrong, the west, the North.
the town-owned border than
Townhomes north.
to the back. But I also hadn't considered it from I assumed there was enough other things, between here and there. I am wondering, because we had two sort of unscheduled demolitions, both here and at the TCI. So which one are you referencing as more impactful from that, TCI vantage point outward? I don't know how to verify that necessarily other than going out there, but
Their
Um,
maintenance building. You're asking about the maintenance
Yeah.
building, tree removal?
yeah. So to answer your question, this seems like a logical compromise.
Well,
But yeah, to be candid, I had prepared like I would
yes.
for our meeting.
Sure, that's
I usually use yours, and we'll get to that discussion later, but, it seems like an appropriate
All right,
compromise.
well, thank you, we appreciate it.
Well, the only difference between the A and B is really a lot of ground shrubs. We're talking quite a few to make it opaque, right? In a B. I'd look more than A. I think the A is a compromise. It would, and personally, I would hate to add how many shrubs it would take.
I
to
do
make it
too, but I
opaque.
hate to compliment or to complicate our city officials, and I disagree with that. I think we need to make it as easy as we can. They work hard. No, that's okay. We're
Yeah.
both entitled to our opinion, but,
Sure.
I know I backed down on some things because it would cause a lot of problems for the city to enforce things. The signage is one of them, because the Jenny out there knocking on everybody's door telling them they couldn't do these neon signs that light up the city like Hong Kong. That's why I would disagree with you. Our staff works so hard and everything, and if she says it makes it easier for her,
No, I hear what you're saying. I just see a lot of 450 foot of 3 foot high opaque is a lot of opaque.
I understand that too.
Yeah. But I guess somebody would just make a motion, getting close to an agreement.
All right.
So with this, you can make a singular motion, moving to either approve, deny, or I guess, yeah, well, no, it would be approve or deny approval of the site plan, and then make it subject to either a recommendation approving the waiver, a recommendation of the developer adding X buffer type and width, just as your motion, make that a subject to. And then subject to addressing review comments, the normal, subject to verbiage, but add that as part of your motion as well.
Two motions you're talking about?
Single. So it's
All in a single motion.
it's approval subject to the addition of whatever buffer you decide to motion.
This is where Ron's the master.
It's a, so, yeah. So, approval of the recommendation, the amendment to keep or have a type B buffer on west property. That's simple.
With 25 or 20 foot, which are you doing?
What is a P? It's 25.
Yeah,
The
25
north
north.
one's the 20.
So when you say B, it's 25 on A, right?
I think just say 25 with the B screen.
All right,
Is what I would say.
that's fine.
And then did you want to include subject to the engineering and staff comments dated such and such date?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Subject to what?
the engineer and staff comments dated
That was
June
also-
June 15th.
Oh, yeah, their recommendations.
Yep. Okay. Just making sure.
Second that. Roll call, please.
Pregnant?
Yes.
Sires?
Yes.
Bower Socks?
Yes.
Vogel?
Yes.
Triplet?
Yes.
Olfest?
No.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Now move on to item number 6, reports and particulars. Council liaison.
Yes, so, thank you guys, it's good to see you tonight. So, the last 2 meetings that we've had since your last P&Z meeting, went over a few things. Ace Hardware, most notably, and it was an easy conversation, because you guys had the messy conversation, messier, I should not messy, but more detailed conversation, and that went through, so, I do think it is noteworthy, the private street component, when we developed that residential piece with the impact of the commercial one here, whenever they get started. So, a little bit concerned about that, although I think that itself is a plus in, what it will be when it's built. If I lived on that road, to kind of Ron's point, and big trucks were pulling in, I think there's a lot of concern, and I think it puts us in a tough spot to monitor that. They don't have the enforcement component. They have to basically wait for something to go wrong and then sue some. That's probably the best course of action. So that was my takeaway on that. I'm never really a big fan of those private roads anyway, but we formally approved, I think the meeting before last, all the Four Seasons stuff. So that's coming up. Back to 2 days. Excited about that. A lot of planning going around there. We had a CIP work session last meeting, productive, I think, to kind of go through where we were at. The city hall coming on, that's going to add a lot of facilities that are needed, but it also kind of put a pause on some things that we had quite honestly planned higher a while back, the regional park. So figuring that out is probably the most pressing large issue, I would say, from my perspective. So good discussion in the work session on that. I'm trying to think of anything else that went through. Questions you guys have?
The Mexican restaurant open.
Yeah.
That's good news.
Yeah, it is. I was kind of, so the amount of, maybe to not waste anybody's time, but just thinking about the amount of commercial construction we have going on or about to start. Home State Bank obviously is coming along. Torres building on Edgewater. I think it's Edgewater, right? They're moving dirt. On Tyler, sorry, yes. On with Life, probably the most impactful, because I was very concerned what was going to happen to that nursing and rehab. And quite honestly, had no clue anything could be as beneficial as what they're doing. So that's great. And then City Hall, if you deem that commercial, which technically would change the zoning, so it's not, but, and then Ace and Maven trucks here, hopefully come in. Dude, that's a lot of commercial, development, so,
Especially with the restaurants coming to town.
yeah.
Or the, yeah, but.
That's Maven Crux.
Maven trucks,
Oh,
assisted living, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
Which I think he said in our meeting, late summer is when
I think they're planning to get started next month,
oh, well, okay.
is what we've heard.
They were just waiting for some title stuff to get taken care of on that parcel.
Yeah, the sooner the better. They don't mow it as well as Cliff did. So.
Well, that was,
They mow it well. I shouldn't say he was. He mowed
It'll
better
be-
than I did.
it'll
but
be way better. It's a complicated situation.
Unnecessary.
Are they putting more parking in Leonard Park there? They're not.
No.
No, and I know you guys talked about that in the meeting. I'm pretty staunchly opposed to using parkland for neighborhood parkland for parking. If we have a need, you know, given where we are with that, you know, don't say, you know, never, but
The shade structure will be going up soon at Leonard Park.
okay.
That the Friends of the Park raised the money for. That's supposed to be installed, I think, Public Works said well, it's a thing. The polls are next month.
You're quiet but smiling.
It's on their list.
It is on the list. It keeps getting moved around, but it's gonna happen this season.
As is the mural at the new Pocket Park. So
Yeah, the Kiwanis Park, the volleyball
Yeah.
was just referred. The
Thank you, Kiwanis.
Yeah, to have that all, hadn't been done for 25 years. Redid, bought everything, kept the same dirt, but just worked it.
Yes.
Sand.
I don't know. I'm smiling
full of-
because when Jason brought it up, he inadvertently took a few shots at. I think it was Mike who put that original one in, and Jason called it, you know, older than dirt or something. Yeah, yeah. And Mike's like, put that in.
Yeah.
I will say as a volleyball player, I appreciate the fact that there's protection and not just a still
Oh,
pole.
yeah. There's padding on the.
It's very scary last season, so I'm personally appreciative.
City manager,
No, thank you.
staff,
Lots of code enforcement stuff right now. It's that time of year.
commission?
I have one thing, I will not be here at, and I'll be 8 hours ahead of you, Jenny, at 2:00 in the morning, so don't worry
And we'll
about
set up a
me.
Zoom.
Nice. We have a motion on the table.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.